Death is inevitable. Dignity? Apparently optional. History books love heroes who died in battle or peacefully in their sleep. This video is not about them. This is about the guy killed by a cow falling through his roof. The king taken out by a pig. The prophet who laughed at his own death prediction and then died from laughing. 33 people whose final moments made fate look like a comedy writer with zero chill. Some are tragic, some are absurd, all of them are real. 1. In 2013, João Maria de Souza was sleeping peacefully in his bed in Caratinga, Brazil. Just a regular Tuesday night. Except the universe had other plans. See, his house was built at the base of a hill, and on that hill, a cow was doing what cows do, which is mostly standing around looking confused. This particular cow wandered onto the asbestos roof, which, spoiler alert, was not designed to support half a ton of beef. The roof gave way, and the cow dropped straight through, landing directly on João. His wife, sleeping right next to him, was completely unharmed. The cow was also fine, by the way, just casually walked away from the crime scene. João survived the initial impact, but died later in the hospital. Imagine being the doctor filling out that paperwork. Cause of death? Cow, from above. No one saw it coming, least of all João. 2. Hans Steininger was the mayor of Braunau am Inn in Austria during the 16th century, and he was famous for exactly one thing: his absolutely ridiculous beard. We are talking 4.5 feet of facial hair. The man looked like a wizard who had given up on life decisions. Now, normally Hans kept this magnificent disaster rolled up and tucked into a pocket. Practical, right? Except one day in 1567, a fire broke out in town. Panic ensued. Hans ran for his life, and in the chaos, his beard came loose. He stepped on it. His own beard. The momentum sent him tumbling down the stairs and he broke his neck. Death by facial hair. The citizens of Braunau were apparently so traumatized, or maybe just fascinated, that they preserved his beard. It is still on display at the local museum today. So if you ever complain about your morning grooming routine, just remember, it could be worse. 3. General John Sedgwick was a Union commander during the American Civil War, and by all accounts, he was a brave and competent leader. But on May 9, 1864, at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, he made one tiny mistake. Confederate sharpshooters were firing from about 1,000 yards away, and his men were understandably nervous, ducking and flinching with every shot. Sedgwick, wanting to boost morale, stood tall and reportedly said, "Why are you dodging? They could not hit an elephant at this dist." He did not finish the sentence. A Confederate bullet struck him just below his left eye, killing him instantly. His last words became one of history's most famous examples of catastrophically bad timing. The universe apparently has zero tolerance for hubris. His men, who had been dodging those bullets, suddenly felt very validated in their life choices. Sedgwick remains the highest-ranking Union officer killed in the Civil War. 4. Aeschylus is known as the father of Greek tragedy, which makes his death almost poetically appropriate, if poetry were written by a drunk comedian. Around 455 BC in Sicily, an eagle was flying overhead carrying a tortoise. Eagles do this because they drop tortoises onto rocks to crack them open. Lunch preparation, ancient style. The problem? Aeschylus was bald. Very bald. And his shiny head apparently looked exactly like a rock to this eagle, which released the tortoise right onto the playwright's skull. One of the greatest literary minds in human history, killed by airborne reptile. The real twist? According to legend, Aeschylus had received a prophecy that he would be killed by a falling object, so he spent his final years outdoors, avoiding buildings. He successfully dodged architecture only to be defeated by a confused bird's lunch. Fate really committed to the bit on that one. 5. Tycho Brahe was a 16th century Danish astronomer, one of the most important scientists of his era. He mapped the stars, challenged established theories, and had a pet moose that allegedly died falling down stairs while drunk. But Tycho's own death was somehow even more absurd. In 1601, he attended a banquet in Prague. At some point during the meal, He desperately needed to use the bathroom. But court etiquette of the time dictated that leaving the table before a royal host was incredibly rude. So Tycho just sat there, for hours, holding it in like a man with priorities severely out of order. By the time he finally excused himself, something had ruptured internally. He developed a bladder infection or possibly kidney failure and died 11 agonizing days later. His final words were reportedly, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." He revolutionized astronomy, but chose politeness over basic biological functions. 6. Frank Hayes was a jockey and horse trainer in New York, and on June 4, 1923, he finally got his big break, riding a horse named Sweet Kiss in a steeplechase at Belmont Park. This was his first win. It was also his last everything. Somewhere during the race, Frank suffered a massive heart attack and died. But here is where it gets weird. His body did not fall off. Sweet Kiss kept running, crossed the finish line first, and Frank Hayes became the only jockey in recorded history to win a race posthumously. Officials did not realize he was dead until they came to congratulate him and found him slumped over in the saddle, already gone. The victory stood. Sweet Kiss was never raced again, earning the nickname Sweet Kiss of Death. Frank Hayes won, technically. He just was not around to enjoy the trophy, the prize money, or, being alive. 7. David Grundman was a doctor from Phoenix, Arizona, who in February 1982 decided to spend his weekend doing what apparently some people do in the desert: shooting at cacti. Not the most admirable hobby. He and his roommate drove out and found a massive saguaro cactus, about 26 feet tall. These giants can live for 200 years and weigh several tons. David shot at it multiple times, and after a few rounds, a 4-foot section of the cactus broke off and fell directly onto him, crushing him to death. His roommate survived to tell the tale. Now, some people call this karma. Others call it Newton's third law with extra irony. The desert does not forget, and it definitely does not forgive. A band even wrote a song about it called Saguaro, with the chorus, "It is hard to be humble when you are from Arizona. Nature always gets the last laugh." 8. Sunanda Kumariratana was the queen consort of Thailand in the late 19th century. In 1880, she was traveling by boat with her young daughter when the vessel capsized in the Chao Phraya River. Dozens of people witnessed the queen and princess struggling in the water. Guards and servants stood on the banks, watching. Nobody helped. Why? Because Thai law at the time made it a capital offense for a commoner to touch a member of the royal family. The punishment was death. So everyone just watched the queen and her daughter drown, paralyzed by protocol. They followed the rules perfectly. They also watched 2 people die, preventable deaths because of those rules. King Chulalongkorn, her husband, was devastated. He later abolished the law. Sometimes the worst tragedies come not from malice, but from systems that nobody questions until it is far too late. 9. Jesse William Lazier was an American physician working in Cuba in 1900 trying to solve one of the era's deadliest mysteries. What caused yellow fever? The disease killed thousands every year, and nobody knew how it spread. Jesse and his team suspected mosquitoes. To prove it, they needed human subjects. And when volunteers were hard to find, Jesse used himself. He let infected mosquitoes bite him deliberately, multiple times. The experiment worked. He proved that mosquitoes were the transmission vector, a discovery that would save countless lives. But Jesse paid the ultimate price. He contracted yellow fever from those bites and died on September 25, 1900, at just 34 years old. His research led directly to mosquito control programs that eradicated yellow fever from many regions. Jesse knew the risks and took them anyway. Science sometimes demands sacrifices, and Jesse gave everything for the answer. 10. Calchas was a legendary Greek seer, famous for his prophecies during the Trojan War. He told Agamemnon to sacrifice his daughter. He predicted the war would last 10 years. The guy had credentials, but then another prophet named Mopsus told Calchas that he would die the day he met someone whose prophetic powers exceeded his own. Time passed, and eventually Calchas met Mopsus, and they had a prophecy competition. Mopsus won. Calchas, realizing the conditions of his death prediction had been met, presumably panicked. But according to another version of the story, Calchas had planted a vineyard and was told he would never drink wine from it. When the grapes finally ripened and he raised the cup to his lips, he was so amused that he had beaten the prophecy that he started laughing uncontrollably. And then he died. From laughter, the prophet could see everyone's future except his own punchline. 11. Antoni Gaudi was a genius. The architect behind Barcelona's Sagrada Familia, one of the most ambitious buildings ever conceived, spent 43 years working on his masterpiece. By 1926, he was 73 years old, disheveled, and completely consumed by his work. He looked, frankly, like a homeless person. On June 7th, he was walking to confession when a tram struck him. He lay in the street, injured and bleeding. Several taxis refused to pick him up because of his appearance. He was eventually taken to a pauper's hospital, where staff did not recognize him. By the time someone identified him as the famous architect, it was too late. He died 2 days later. Thousands attended his funeral. The man who designed one of Europe's most beautiful churches died because cab drivers judged his outfit. The Sagrada Familia remains unfinished to this day. Scheduled completion? Maybe 2026, a century after his death. 12. Odo von Horvath was a Hungarian-German playwright known for dark, satirical works. He was also absolutely terrified of thunderstorms, like pathologically afraid. On June 1, 1938, he was in Paris when a storm rolled in. A friend offered him a ride, but Odon refused to get in the car during lightning, too dangerous. Instead, he decided to walk down the Champs-Élysées, apparently believing that being outside during a thunderstorm was the safer option. You can probably see where this is going. Lightning struck a tree on the famous avenue. A branch broke off and fell directly onto his head, killing him instantly. The man whose entire life strategy was avoid lightning died from lightning. Indirectly, technically, but the storm got him anyway. He was 36. His fear was not irrational, it was prophetic. He just chose the exact wrong way to act on it. 13. Arnold Bennett was a celebrated English novelist in the early 20th century. He wrote dozens of books, sold millions of copies, and was one of the highest-paid authors of his era. In 1931, he visited Paris and found himself in an argument about water safety. Parisians, he insisted, were being paranoid. The tap water was perfectly fine. To prove his point with maximum drama, he grabbed a glass and drank the water straight from the tap. 2 months later, he was dead from typhoid fever, almost certainly contracted from that glass of water. His final creative act was a demonstration of confident wrongness. The man who wrote about the complexities of human nature failed to account for the complexities of Parisian plumbing. Sometimes being right is less important than being alive. Arnold chose neither. His death became a cautionary tale about mixing stubbornness with hydration. 14. King George II of Great Britain ruled for 33 years, fought in battles, navigated European politics, and managed an empire. His death in 1760 was significantly less dignified. On the morning of October 25th, the 76-year-old king woke up, drank his chocolate, and went to the toilet. Shortly after, his valet heard a loud crash. He rushed in to find the king on the floor. An autopsy revealed that George had suffered a thoracic aortic dissection. Basically, his major artery ripped apart, likely from straining too hard. He died on the toilet. A king who had commanded armies, outlived his enemies, and ruled the most powerful nation on earth, taken out by constipation. The lesson here is probably about fiber intake, or maybe about the universe's complete indifference to status. George's death was instant. His embarrassment, however, became eternal. 15. Harry Houdini was the greatest escape artist in history. He escaped from handcuffs, straitjackets, locked boxes underwater, and every trap human ingenuity could devise. But he could not escape a college student with poor timing. Houdini often boasted about his physical conditioning, particularly his abdominal strength. On October 22, 1926, a student named J. Gordon Whitehead asked if it was true that Houdini could take any punch to the stomach. Before Houdini could properly brace himself, Whitehead punched him several times in the abdomen. Hard. Houdini already had appendicitis, and the blows may have worsened his condition. He performed through days of worsening pain before finally collapsing. Emergency surgery revealed a ruptured appendix and raging peritonitis. He died on Halloween, 1926. The man who escaped death as a career was killed by an unsolicited demonstration. Some traps have no locks to pick. 16. Fagiliu Mukhametsyanov was a 49-year-old Russian woman who collapsed at home in 2011 and was pronounced dead by doctors. Her family, heartbroken, arranged the funeral. Friends and relatives gathered to pay their respects. The ceremony was proceeding normally until Fagiliu woke up. Inside the coffin, she opened her eyes to see people dressed in black, crying, standing around her body. She screamed. Then she suffered a massive heart attack from the shock and died. For real this time. She was alive for 12 minutes after coming back. Her husband later said she was so frightened by what she saw that her heart gave out. The doctors who originally pronounced her dead had to do it again. This is the only recorded case of someone being scared to death by their own funeral. Death apparently does not appreciate people trying to leave early without permission. 17. Pyrrhus of Epirus was one of ancient history's greatest military commanders. Hannibal considered him second only to Alexander. He spent his life winning battles across the Mediterranean, pioneering tactics still studied today. His death? Significantly less strategic. In 272 BC, during street fighting in Argos, an old woman was watching from a rooftop as Pyrrhus engaged her son in combat below. Watching her child about to be killed, she did what any mother would do. She grabbed a roof tile and threw it at Pyrrhus's head. It hit him. He fell off his horse, stunned. Enemy soldiers quickly finished him off. One of history's most brilliant generals, conqueror of nations, defeated by home improvement materials thrown by someone's mom. Her name was not recorded, but she did what entire armies could not. Pyrrhus gave us the term Pyrrhic victory. His death, however, was just ironic defeat. 18. Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher famous for declaring that everything flows and that you cannot step into the same river twice. Profound stuff. His death was less profound. He developed dropsy, a condition involving severe fluid retention. His solution? He covered himself entirely in cow manure, believing that the heat would evaporate the excess fluids from his body. Then he lay in the sun to dry. Now, ancient medical practices were often questionable, but this was creative even by those standards. The manure dried and hardened around him, encasing him. And then, according to some accounts, dogs came along and did not recognize him. They attacked and killed him. The philosopher of constant change died because he could not change out of a dung cocoon fast enough. Reality, which Heraclitus spent his life analyzing, apparently analyzed him back. 19. Richard Versal was a veteran tenor performing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York on January 5, 1996. The opera was The Macropolis Case, about a woman who discovers an elixir of immortality. Versal was on stage, standing on a ladder, singing the role of an elderly law clerk. He delivered the line, "Too bad you can only live so long." Then he suffered a heart attack, fell from the ladder, and died. Right there, in front of a packed house. The audience initially thought it was part of the performance. It was not. The show was canceled. Versal was 63 years old, and his final professional words were a commentary on mortality, seconds before demonstrating it. Opera is known for dramatic irony. This was dramatic irony performing at levels usually reserved for Greek playwrights. The universe has a scriptwriter, and that scriptwriter has a very dark sense of humor. 20. King Philip of France, the eldest son of Louis VI, was 15 years old in 1131 and riding through Paris when destiny intervened in the most ridiculous way possible. A black pig escaped from a dung heap along his route and ran directly under his horse. The horse stumbled and threw Philip. He landed badly, suffering severe head injuries, and died the next day. A pig, emerging from literal garbage, killed the heir to the French throne. The consequences were massive. Philip's younger brother Louis became the next king, eventually marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine, a union that reshaped European politics for generations. If that pig had stayed in its pile, European history looks completely different. One filthy animal, one moment of chaos, and the entire trajectory of a nation shifted. That pig is arguably one of the most influential pigs in world history. It accomplished more in 5 seconds than most of us do in a lifetime. 21. Sir Arthur Aston was a royalist commander during the English Civil War, known for his loyalty to King Charles and for having a wooden leg. In 1649, Oliver Cromwell's forces stormed the town of Drogheda in Ireland, where Aston was stationed. When the town fell, soldiers captured Aston and became convinced that he had hidden gold coins inside his prosthetic leg. Spoiler, he had not. But that did not stop them from removing the leg and beating him to death with it. His own leg, the very thing that was supposed to help him walk, became the instrument of his demise. The soldiers broke the leg open afterward and found nothing. Just wood. Sir Arthur died for imaginary treasure, killed by his own mobility aid. The English Civil War had many brutal moments, but this one combines brutality with the kind of absurdity that almost feels fictional. Unfortunately for Arthur, it was very real. 22. Grigory Rasputin was a Siberian mystic who gained enormous influence over the Russian royal family by allegedly treating the hemophiliac heir. Nobles despised him. On December 30th, 1916, they decided to do something about it. First, they fed him cakes and wine laced with cyanide. Rasputin reportedly ate and drank everything and complained only of heartburn. So they shot him, in the chest. He fell, appeared dead, then suddenly woke up and attacked his killer. They shot him again, and again. Then they beat him with clubs for good measure. Finally, they wrapped his body and threw him into the frozen Neva River. When his corpse was recovered, the autopsy reportedly showed water in his lungs, meaning he was still alive when he hit the water and tried to escape. Whether all the details are true or embellished by legend, Rasputin refused to die like a normal person. Even death needed multiple attempts. 23. Bobby Leach was a professional daredevil who, on July 25, 1911, became the second person ever to survive going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. The fall broke his jaw, both kneecaps, and fractured several bones. But he lived. He spent 6 months recovering, then spent years touring, showing off his barrel and telling his story. He was, by any measure, extremely hard to kill. Then, in 1926, while walking down a street in New Zealand, Bobby slipped on an orange peel. He injured his leg, the wound became infected, gangrene set in, and doctors amputated. He died from complications 2 months later. The man who conquered one of nature's most powerful waterfalls was defeated by discarded fruit. Niagara Falls throws 750,000 gallons of water per second over a 170-foot drop. Bobby survived that. He could not survive citrus. Life is not fair, and neither is sidewalk debris. 24. Draco was an ancient Athenian lawmaker whose legal code was so harsh that minor offenses carried the death penalty. His name literally gave us the word draconian. But his death, around 600 BC, was the opposite of harsh. It was affectionate. Allegedly, too affectionate. According to ancient sources, Draco was in a theater on the island of Aegina when the audience decided to show their appreciation for him. They threw their cloaks and hats at him. This was a traditional Greek sign of respect and admiration. The problem was that too many people threw too much clothing. Draco was buried under the pile of garments and suffocated, killed by love, or at least by the ancient Greek equivalent of being mobbed by fans. The lawgiver who prescribed death for stealing a cabbage was himself sentenced to death by appreciation. History does enjoy its symmetry. 25. King Serinda ruled a kingdom in medieval Burma and had one notable obsession: cucumbers. He loved them so much that he had a special royal cucumber garden and posted armed guards to protect his precious vegetables. Nobody was allowed in the garden without explicit permission. One night, the king himself went to the garden for a late-night cucumber snack. He did not announce himself. The gardener on duty, seeing a shadowy figure among the vegetables, assumed it was a thief. He did exactly what he was ordered to do: protect the cucumbers at all costs. He struck the intruder with a hoe, killing him instantly. The intruder was, of course, the king. Serinda's security protocols were so effective that they killed the person they were designed to protect. His love for cucumbers was so intense that cucumbers, indirectly, became his end. Royal vegetable enthusiasm has rarely been so fatal. 26. King Edmund II, known as Edmund Ironside, was an 11th century English king who spent his short reign fighting Danish invaders. He was tough, respected, and by most accounts genuinely difficult to kill in battle. According to legend, however, his enemies found another way. The story goes that an assassin hid in the cesspit beneath the royal toilet, basically crouching in a pit of sewage, waiting. When Edmund sat down to answer nature's call, the assassin thrust a sword upward into a part of the king that armor definitely did not protect. It is a horrible way to go. Historians debate whether this actually happened or if it was invented later to mock the king. Either way, the story stuck. Edmund Ironside, warrior king, possibly murdered from below while using the bathroom. Some say the assassin was working for King Canute. If true, Canute literally won the throne through the bottom. 27. Zeuxis was a Greek painter from the 5th century BC, considered one of the greatest artists of his time. He was famous for painting so realistically that birds would try to eat the grapes in his pictures. According to legend, he died while working on a commission. An elderly woman wanted a portrait of herself depicted as Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love. Zeuxis looked at his client, looked at his canvas, and tried to paint this very mortal, very aged woman as the embodiment of divine beauty. The contrast between reality and artistic goal was apparently too much. He started laughing and could not stop. He laughed so hard that he died. This story is almost certainly exaggerated or invented, but it survived for millennia. Zeuxis, master of visual realism, killed by the absurdity of having to paint someone unrealistically. Comedy is tragedy plus time, and sometimes tragedy is just comedy with bad timing. 28. Kurt Gödel was one of the 20th century's most brilliant mathematicians, famous for his incompleteness theorems that revolutionized logic and mathematics. He was also profoundly paranoid. Gödel was convinced that people were trying to poison him. His solution was to only eat food that his wife Adele had prepared and tasted first. This system worked for decades. Then, in 1977, Adele was hospitalized for 6 months. Gödel refused to eat anything she had not tested. He would not trust hospitals, restaurants, friends, or anyone else. By the time Adele was released, Kurt had essentially starved himself. He died in January 1978, weighing only 65 pounds. His death certificate listed malnutrition and inanition caused by personality disturbance. One of humanity's greatest logical minds was defeated by a problem that had obvious solutions he simply could not accept. His incompleteness theorems proved some truths cannot be proven. His death proved some fears cannot be reasoned away. 29. King Louis III of France was 18 years old in 882, and apparently quite taken with a young woman in Touraine. According to chronicles, he was chasing her on horseback, possibly romantically, possibly less appropriately. She ran toward her father's house and ducked through a low doorway. Louis, presumably focused on his pursuit rather than his surroundings, did not duck. He slammed his head into the stone lintel at full speed. The impact fractured his skull, and he died shortly after. A king of France killed by architecture while chasing a girl. The doorway was just doing its job. Louis was not doing his. His brother Carloman became king instead. History does not record what happened to the girl, but she presumably had a very strange story to tell for the rest of her life. Remember that time the king died trying to follow me inside? Medieval romance had very different outcomes. 30. Alan Pinkerton founded the famous Pinkerton National Detective Agency and spent his career hunting criminals, protecting Abraham Lincoln, and building one of America's first private intelligence networks. He was tough, competent, and survived multiple attempts on his life. In 1884, he was walking in Chicago when he slipped on the pavement and bit his tongue. The wound became infected. Gangrene developed. 3 weeks later, he was dead. The man who foiled assassination plots and chased outlaws across the country was killed by a sidewalk and his own teeth. His agency survives today. His tongue did not. Pinkerton spent decades proving that no criminal was beyond his reach. But apparently, basic pedestrian hazards were beyond his. Every detective story needs an unexpected twist. Alan Pinkerton's final case was against bacteria, and he lost. 31. Eleazar Avaran was a Jewish warrior fighting against the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. During the Battle of Beth Zechariah, he spotted an elephant carrying what he believed was a king or high-ranking commander, decorated with royal armor. Eleazar decided to become a hero. He charged through enemy lines, dove under the massive war elephant, and stabbed it in the belly with his spear. The elephant died. And then the elephant fell directly onto Eleazar. The man who killed the beast was crushed by his own victory. He is celebrated in the books of Maccabees as a martyr and hero. But he also made a significant tactical error, killing something enormous while standing directly beneath it. Eleazar proved he was brave enough to attack an elephant. He did not prove he had considered the physics of what happens next. 32. Tennessee Williams was one of America's greatest playwrights, author of A Streetcar Named Desire and the Glass Menagerie. His death in 1983, at age 71, was initially reported with a bizarre detail. He had choked on a bottle cap. According to the popular version, Williams was using eye drops or nasal spray and had a habit of holding the cap in his mouth while applying the medicine. He inhaled, the cap lodged in his throat, and he suffocated. Later investigations suggested drugs and alcohol may have been more significant factors, and the cap might have entered his airway after he was already unconscious. But the bottle cap story stuck. One of the 20th century's great voices, silenced by a piece of plastic smaller than a coin. Williams spent his career exploring tragedy and human frailty. His death, whether from the cap or not, was both fragile and strange. 33. Basil I was a Byzantine emperor who rose from peasant origins to rule one of history's greatest empires. In 886, he was hunting when a deer charged him. Somehow, his belt became entangled in the deer's antlers. The deer panicked and ran. And ran. For allegedly 16 miles, the emperor was dragged through forests and rough terrain, unable to free himself. A guard eventually caught up and killed the deer, cutting the emperor loose. But the damage was done. Basil died from his injuries shortly after. A man who had survived palace intrigues, military campaigns, and court assassinations was taken down by a deer and an unfortunately sturdy belt. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never considered a threat. Basil conquered nations. The deer conquered Basil. The belt just held on. 33 people. 33 moments where the universe said, "Watch this. Now here is what I need from you." Pick one death from this list. If someone put a gun to your head and said, "Choose one, this is how you go," which one are you taking? Drop your answer below. I want to see your survival math. Like this video if you made it to the end without questioning every object in your room. Subscribe if you want more proof that reality is stranger than fiction. See you in the next one.